Conveyance of interpersonal and emotional messages. More meaning is generated from non-verbal communication than from verbal. We believe more on non-verbal communication. Studies say that we derive almost 90% of the meaning from non-verbal messages. However, other studies say that we derive 65%, up to 65% of message from non-verbal cues. So we can safely say that from 90 to 65% of the meanings are derived from non-verbal messages. We rely more on non-verbal messages than verbal messages, especially when we are in a conflict. So if we feel that the other person is not true to his word, so we rely more on his or her non-verbal messages than on the verbal messages. So we believe more on non-verbal messages. We may hone in on non-verbal cues to fill in the meaning. So when we are listening to somebody and we feel that there is some difference between the verbal message and the non-verbal message, like eye contact, facial expression, body language. So we rely more on the non-verbal messages. What are you doing tonight could mean any number of things. For example, if somebody asks this question to us, they may be, or if we put up the same question to somebody and the other person may think that we are asking that question for certain reason. For example, the tone will tell that why we are asking this question, either as a doubt, either as a confirmation, or either as really having some sort of information. So the reliance is more on the non-verbal aspect of the message. We also put more weight on non-verbal communication when determining a person's credibility. For example, if a teacher asks a student why he or she did not do his or her homework, and the reason the student gives is that he or she was out of sort, was sick, the teacher takes more meaning from the non-verbal message, the non-verbal cues, the way the verbal message was given than the verbal message, and will instruct the student according to the non-verbal message. So non-verbal message is more creditable. In some situation, verbal communication might carry more meaning than non-verbal. However, in short information, short statement, where a lot of things are already known, so verbal message may carry more weight. For example, we are used to listening to our teachers when he or she enters the class and gives a certain instruction. So in that case, we rely more on the verbal message than on the non-verbal message. Similarly, in interactions where information exchange is the focus, at a briefing at work, for example, verbal communication likely accounts for much more of the meaning generated. So, as I said, at workplace where some things are predetermined, the officer obviously gives some certain instructions to his or her subordinates. So in this case, generally, we believe more on the verbal messages than on the non-verbal messages, and we, in certain cases, we ignore non-verbal messages. So a key principle of non-verbal communication is that it often takes on more meaning in interpersonal and or emotional exchange. This aspect is related more to the interpersonal communication that is more informal. So in informal communication especially, we rely more on non-verbal communication. Obviously, as we just said, that in formal situation, like a classroom, like a working place, we rely more on verbal communication, or we sometimes ignore nonverbal cues. But in interpersonal communication, and where the emotions have to be expressed, we rely more on nonverbal cues, wordless cues, than on words.